I'm Marcia Brown. I'm chair of the State Tax Issues Committee, and we're very interested in, of course, our regressive taxes and the shortness of revenue for things like homeless housing and for severe income inequality. So today we're having wonderful to have Tim Burgess come talk to us about one of our biggest problems. And I would like to give a short introduction for Tim, a little background. He was on the city council for 10 years and mayor for a short time during that period. He was first elected to city-wide in 2007 and won re-election in 2011 and 2015. Tim was the lead architect of the Seattle preschool program for the city's 3- and 4-year-old children, one of only 3 municipal government facilitated preschool programs in the US to meet all the 10 national quality standards. Tim led the effort in 2011 to double the size of the city's family and education levy, so schools-based health clinics could be located in every middle and high school. Tim developed the Seattle Retirement Savings Plan for workers without an employer-offered plan, and making Seattle the first city in the nation to create such a mandatory plan. Under his leadership, Seattle became the 4th major US city to fully fund the Nurse Family Partnership, a home visitation program for low-income families that the New York Times calls America's best anti-poverty program. Tim also persuaded his colleagues to adopt an excise tax on the sale of firearms and ammunition, with the revenue dedicated to gun violence prevention and research. In his time at City Hall, he was a consistent and staunch advocate for crime, justice, and police reform, for economic growth policies, and for tourism promotion. Tim serves on the Plymouth Housing Board of Trustees. And he was also a radio journalist and a police officer, which I think we have to mention. So Tim, we're really pleased to have you here today to talk about Charter 29, Compassion Seattle.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcia. Can you hear me okay?
I guess.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
And good to see you all.
Yes,
I've been up to Horizon House many times. Yes, I understand it's being recorded. That's fine. But can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
People still have their microphones hot. They should mute them.
All right. Yeah. So I'm here to talk to you about Compassion Seattle, which is an organization that was formed early this year. So we're just a few months old. We're made up of neighborhood representatives and business people in business improvement areas like in Ballard and in Soto, as well as folks representing the Downtown Seattle Association and the Seattle Chamber. And the reason we came together is because we're very concerned that if the city does not effectively address the problem of unsheltered living in the city, in other words, people camping in our parks and on our sidewalks, that is potentially going to hinder or derail the city's economic recovery. I think all of you know that in Seattle, most of our tax revenue, most of our jobs are in medium to small businesses. And those businesses, many of them, especially in the retail, hospitality, and tourism area, rely on people being out and about and people being able to come into stores and visit and do their shopping and those types of things. So that was one motivation. How do we make sure that we have the economic recovery that we need and that it is sustainable? The second motivation was we have almost 4,000 people at the last official count. It was 3,700 people that are living outside in our city. And they're living in tents, in encampments, and these things are not, they're not safe. They're not good places for people to be living. And it's not good for the surrounding neighbors either. And so we came together and realized that even though we have a state of emergency declared in Seattle related to homelessness, we have not done sufficiently good work to help resolve the problem. So I'm going to share my screen. I think I was given screen sharing capabilities here. Oh, it says I do not have screen sharing capabilities. Can somebody?
Now.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's usually pretty easy to do. Let me get this up.
The lawmaker who wants to help make sure.
So this state of emergency was declared back in November of 2015. And yet, as I mentioned, we have thousands of people living unsheltered in our city, which presents a growing public health and public safety problem for the city and is unsafe for people living outside like this. And it's disruptive of our public spaces. And unfortunately, and tragically, city government does not have a comprehensive plan to address this problem. Their efforts so far have been somewhat ad hoc and piecemeal. And so the ballot measure that we have proposed, Charter Amendment number 29, will create an action-oriented plan to address this problem. And let me go through some of the main component parts that will take effect if the voters of Seattle adopt this charter amendment next November. Now, in order to get on the November ballot, we are gathering signatures right now on a citizen petition. We need 33,060 signatures to qualify for the November ballot, which means we need to collect more than that to make sure we have the number that we need. And if we collect those signatures in the next 3.5 weeks, then we will qualify for the ballot in November, and you and every other voter in Seattle will be able to say yes or no to this measure. And we hope you say yes, because here's the benefits of adopting this plan. Mental health and substance use disorder treatment services will be greatly expanded. And many, certainly not all, but many of the people living unsheltered in our parks, on our sidewalks, have either mental health challenges or they have an addiction problem and they need treatment services. Second thing that the Charter Amendment does is it creates a behavioral health rapid response capability. So think of a specially trained and prepared team that can respond to mental health crisis situations. And in many situations, this new team can be sent in lieu of the police, who are often not needed or necessarily prepared to deal with those situations. So it creates this new rapid response capability. The measure also creates 2,000 units of emergency housing within 12 months. So by the end of 2022, we will have 2,000 more units of enhanced shelter beds, tiny houses, rented motel or motel rooms, or other forms of temporary housing. And this is important because what the Charter Amendment 29 does is it moves people inside, which is what our goal is, so that they can be safely, securely housed, and then, if necessary, receive the behavioral health treatment services that they need and certainly deserve. As services are being made available, this charter amendment affirms the right of the city government to keep our parks and playgrounds, sports fields, public spaces, sidewalks and streets clear of encampments. It also affirms the city government's ability to close encampments immediately that pose a public health or safety risk or block access to public spaces. The Charter Amendment also requires that the city government identify the causes of racial disproportionality among the homeless population. And this is a severe problem in Seattle. We have extreme disparities among those who are living unsheltered in our city compared to their percentage of the population as a whole. And we want to identify what's causing that and then take proactive steps to reduce that. It establishes a dedicated fund in the city treasury to be used for human service activities, including homelessness. And it sets it up in a way so that individuals, businesses, philanthropy, foundations can contribute to that fund in addition to the government money that's there. And if you itemize your federal tax return, those contributions are tax deductible. It requires of the city's general fund revenues into this new dedicated fund for human services. This year, 2021, the city government is putting 11% of the general fund toward these services for human services and for homelessness assistance. So we raise it up 1 percentage point. If that was in effect this year, it would have added about 18 million more dollars to human services activities through city government. That 18 million is more than adequate to pay for the behavioral health services that this charter amendment requires that the city government start to fund. It also requires the city government to continue its support and investments in the new regional homelessness authority that's been established. And it makes sure that the city stays a key partner with the regional homelessness authority. And I'm going to remind people to please mute your microphone. Please mute your microphone so we don't listen to all of your private conversations. The other and final point I'll make before I begin to answer questions is that we have built in to the charter amendment an automatic sunset or an automatic expiration. So at the end of 2027, this charter amendment will become null and void. And we really had two reasons for doing that. First, if what the charter amendment calls for is not working, by the end of 6 years, we probably should get rid of it and try something else at that point. But we were also very sensitive to the fact that we were using the charter in a way that maybe isn't typical, certainly is allowed, but hasn't been typical, to force and compel city government to take these specific action steps. And the only way the charter can be changed is by a vote of the people. And so we thought, let's build in an automatic expiration so that we have time to implement what it calls for, but it expires at the end of 6 years. Compassion Seattle has a website. There it is on the bottom of the screen, compassionseattle.org. You can read the actual text of the ballot measure there. You can find answers to all kinds of questions that you might have about the charter amendment. You can also download the petition and print it out right there at Horizon House and go around and collect signatures if you want to do that to make sure that we qualify for the ballot. If you do print it out, please note, you must print both sides of the petition on a single sheet of paper. So on the front side is where you sign signatures, and on the back side is the full text of the amendment. And those must be printed on a single sheet of paper. If you only print the signature side, and collect 10 signatures and turn them in, those signatures are not accepted by King County elections. So you must print both sides of that petition form. So go to compassionseattle.org if you're interested in doing that. You'll see in the upper right-hand corner a button that you can choose to download the petition form. So I will stop sharing my screen and come back here with you. And I'd be happy to answer. I think we have about 15 minutes left, so I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you for your time. I don't know how, am I supposed to call on people, or does the moderator want to do that?
Marsha is muted. I think she wanted to call on me. I'll assume she did. This is Peter Shapiro.
Hi, Peter.
We knew each other on the campaign trail years ago.
Yes.
I was in part of the Fighting 46 and up in the Northeast area when you were a council member, and we met many occasions. And that I want to commend you for, and thank you for being here, and commend you for the visibility that you have created for the huge problem that we have. Now, I've been a volunteer for about 30 years in the homeless advocacy community. So I've learned a lot of things. I have good friends still in that community, and so I'm still active. In particular, you're calling out the necessity of having services to accompany housing primarily, and then services as well, is wonderful. And it's sparked a lot of great responses. If there's time later on, I can show you all the great leaders in the Northwest business community and a group I'm sure you're not aware of, Tim, Challenge Seattle, led by CEO Christine Gregoire, about 24, who are lined up firmly behind the idea of providing services to help people who are chronically homeless, those 3,000 to 4,000 or 5,000, depending on how you count them, people who are living on the street and are the most visible blight upon our social conscience and lead the most miserable lives, who need the most help. So I commend you for that. And I'm not surprised, because you're a member of Plymouth Housing Board. They are a leader in that area of permanent supportive housing, and they do great work. So that's all good. I do have some concerns I want to advance on behalf of the homelessness advocacy community, and see if you can clear them up. And okay. I'm going to share my screen, if I may, if I do it successfully, and we'll talk about a couple of points. Okay, here it is. Okay, so the Compassion Seattle website description of the proposed amendment declares various things. The part I deleted before what's up there on the screen is where it discusses the need for the assistance, the social services, the health assistance, and so on. But then it gets down to a point where it raises eyebrows in the community of homeless advocates. You say in the preamble to your website, only after services and housing options are available is the city required to keep public spaces, including parks and sidewalks, open and clear of encampments. That is commendable if that would be the case, but that's not what the charter language says. It's quoted at the bottom of this page. It is city policy to avoid as much as possible. That's not only if, but as much as possible, dispersing people except to safe and secure housing. Could you comment on that?
Sure, Peter, thank you for your question. So the purpose of the charter amendment is to move people inside and to give them a safe and secure place to stay. And if they need services, to make those services available to them. This is not about sweeps. This is not about rounding people up and either arresting them for violating the city's anti-camping ordinance or anything else. This is a compassionate humanitarian response to a real problem that exists in our city today. And it's a problem that is harmful to the people camping outside, and it's harmful to their neighbors that live near these encampments and it blocks access to our park and public spaces around the city. So if you read the entire charter amendment, you will see that it is focused on how to deliver services and housing to these individuals. It also recognizes that the city retains the ability to close encampments if they are creating a public health or public safety problem, or if they're blocking the use of, say, a sidewalk where people are camping on a sidewalk and therefore the sidewalk's not usable by other people. The city does have the ability to close that encampment. But the primary purpose here is to persuade, to nudge, to encourage people who are living outside to accept housing and accept services. That is the ultimate goal of this charter amendment.
Absolutely, but you must agree with me that the last words in there that are in the charter itself are more aspirational than mandatory on city government.
The way the charter amendment is written is that the city may, after services are available, close encampment.
Let me move on to.
It is not an.
Oh, sorry. You're breaking up, I'm afraid, sir.
The initiative amendment also says that if you're dispersing people, which provide services first and foremost.
Let me get some real numbers on this issue. So, as you said earlier in your introductory description of the charter, that the city shall provide 2,000 additional emergency or permanent housing services within 12 months of passage. But in reality, my figures were there are about 5,000 documented people who categorize as permanently homeless people living on the street. Anyway, I think you referred to a figure of about 3,700. Anyway, there's a gap using a 3,700 to 1,700 person gap who, by the direction mandated by the charter, would be left out of the services that are necessary to help them and mainly necessary before they can be swept up and put somewhere out of sight. So it seems, again, and I'd like to be able to advocate back to my colleagues in the homeless area, that as much as possible becomes, by dint of the numbers and scale that we have of the problem, really impossible for a large.
So Peter, here's where there might be a disconnect. And we're well aware that some of the homelessness activists do not like this measure, because this measure challenges the status quo. This measure says what we're doing today, which has resulted in almost 4,000 people living unsheltered in our city, is not working. And so if the voters of Seattle adopt this charter amendment, then we're going to take a different path. We're going to have a new action plan that actually helps people and brings them inside and provides the services that they need. That's what this is all about. Let's change the status quo and let's get people inside.
And I really would love it if you and your friends, and I'm sure that many, would help convince the business leaders to contribute to that fund. There is wealth here that would help solve this problem way beyond our current abilities just as a government. And the wealth is there. If I would show you those 24 or so CEOs of leading corporations from Boeing to Costco and so on, it would be pretty apparent. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll get out of the way for other people.
You bet, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else would like to ask a question? Laura?
Yes, thank you very much, Tim, for being here. I'd like to ask why you chose to make it a charter amendment rather than propose it in, let's say, an initiative form. the charter is our basic governmental structure for Seattle, like our Constitution. So that's a really heavy way to try to accomplish something. Also takes away authority and flexibility for the elected officials to act. So I wondered if you'd comment on that.
Sure. Thank you, Laura. So there's two ways that the people of Seattle can petition their government. One way is the more common citizen initiative to adopt an ordinance. So what the citizen initiative process recognizes is if the legislative authority of Seattle is not acting in the way that people want it to act, then they can take that power themselves and through the citizen initiative pass an ordinance. The problem with that approach is the citizen initiative to adopt an ordinance cannot budget, which we wanted to do, and cannot administer programs, which we also wanted to do. And so that forced us to look at the other avenue that the citizens can use, and that is to amend the city charter. Now, I do acknowledge that it's not typically done this way, but because we wanted to allocate funds and the budget, and we also wanted to lay out a very specific action plan, that was the only choice we had. Now, King County government has a charter as well, and they review it and change it every 10 years automatically. In fact, we all just voted last November to change how the sheriff is elected or shift it back to being appointed instead of elected. And we made other changes to the charter as well. So I don't think amending the charter, especially when we have the sunset clause in there, makes this impossible or inappropriate in any way. It also does not take away the authority of our elected officials. So for example, we lay out, here's the steps we want city government to take, but we don't really tell them exactly how to do it. We leave that to the council and the mayor to make those determinations. So we set the specific goal and the outcome that we want to achieve, but we do not actually spell out exactly how they have to go about executing that responsibility.
Well, if I could just respond, your amendment does say specifically there has to be 12% of the budget allocated to this and 2,000 units to be built. So that's pretty Correct. Specific direction.
But we don't, yes, that's true, but we don't tell them how to spend that 12%. They will still go through their normal budgeting process with the mayor and make that determination. We also don't tell them how to provide the 2,000 units. We just say, you need to provide 2,000 units of emergency housing within 12 months, which by the way, is a very doable figure if we have the political will to do it.
Okay, thank you.
What about the shelters? Most people do not want to go into shelters. Yes. And so it worries me that with your having three options there, that the shelter option will be predominant. And although you did say it will be a 24/7 shelter, right?
Yes. Yes. And Marcia, the old shelters were like what you were describing, a large room with mats, maybe 6 or 8 inches apart from each other. People, I wouldn't like that. You wouldn't like that. And most people living with homelessness don't like it either. But the city and King County now fund what are referred to as enhanced shelters. I just toured one a couple of weeks ago down in the Soto neighborhood of Seattle, just south of downtown. And it was launched late last year at the request of Seattle and King County. It's run by the Salvation Army. It is an enhanced shelter. Every person there has a semi-private space. They're about 8 by 10 feet in size. So it's clearly small, but it's much better than living outside. They have a table there that they can sit at. They have 24/7 access. They have 3 meals a day. And importantly, they have the housing navigation, case management, and social services on site right there. In fact, we watched a nurse helping one of the residents of that shelter. That shelter was fully operational within 3 months of when it was designated to be created, and it can house up to 300 people. So we do that a few more times, and believe me, those spaces are a lot better than living in a tent out in a park somewhere. And they're low barrier. You can have your animal. They make accommodations if you have a partner, and it's a good solution. It's much better than staying outside.
So they're just material screens and privacy. Can you close it off?
Yes, they are semi-private. They have screens on 3 sides. They're open to the main walkway, but otherwise they have screens around 3 sides of their space.
Oh dear. Okay. Anyone else have a question? Bill? You're muted, Bill.
I'm just curious about the reaction, Mr. Burgess, of your group, the business community that's behind this, to proposals that we've studied a little bit here that go under titles like permanent housing for the homeless, which seems to me an altogether better kind of arrangement, but obviously more expensive and requires more of a dedication to resolving the problem, not to clean up the business community, but to protect the people who are homeless. And I just wonder what your reactions to that are.
Did you hear that, Tim?
Yeah, yes, I did. And I'm sorry, but I am having a little internet. I'm up in the San Juan Islands, so we're kind of semi-civilized up here. So the Wi-Fi signal is not as strong as I would hope. The Charter Amendment does definitely affirm the importance of permanent supportive housing, Bill. But if we're going to solve the problem of unsheltered living in our city, we can't wait until we build enough permanent supportive housing for everybody. So we need this interim step. We need to provide emergency housing so that people can move from parks and sidewalks inside and be cared for appropriately.
It's just providing enough funds to do all the things we want to do. It's so difficult.
Well, we certainly think it does. So we mentioned the 18 million additional funds that should be allocated to this. But remember, Seattle right this year in 2021 is now forecasted to bring in 40 million additional dollars that they had planned for. How will they use that 40 million? We think they should prioritize the number one issue for the people of Seattle, which is homelessness, and help tackle this problem. King County and Seattle in the next 6 months or so are going to receive almost $800 million from the federal government as part of the American Rescue Act of 2021. Some of those dollars should be dedicated to this purpose. So it's our position that we have more than sufficient funds to provide the 2,000 units, to provide the behavioral health services, and maybe after a couple of years and this program is up and running, the city government may decide they need more money. Then after we've rebuilt the public's trust that the government can actually tackle this problem and do something about it, maybe they can then seek additional revenue if they think that's appropriate. But the funds are there now to do what this charter amendment calls for.
And to do enough more to house all the rest of the homeless. It sounds like there will be funds for it, but
Jim,
we
I was
can't get
wondering-
the city to do it. Yes,
Sorry, were you done, Marcia?
yes, May.
Tim, I was wondering who the primary opponents are, and well, I'll leave it at that for a moment.
Sure. Great question, May. The Transit Writers Union is opposed. Real Change newspaper is opposed. Nicholsville is opposed. Most of the people who are opposed are, we might say they're in the activist community who want to keep, pushing on issues with government. As we developed the charter amendment, we reached out to the organizations in Seattle that provide direct services to the homeless, like Plymouth Housing, like Fair Start, like DESC, United Way, the mental health and addiction folks in our region. And they helped us write this measure. So we were very careful in listening to those who are dealing with this issue on the ground every day of the year, and they helped inform how we would write this measure.
And then can I assume from that they are actively supporting it?
Some are. Some of them are still going through their board approval process as to whether or not they can enforce or endorse rather a political measure. But they've stuck with us. They're still part of the alliance who advanced this ballot measure.
Thank you.
What about the city council people that have come out, like Gene Godden and the group that were in the Seattle Times article?
Yes, some of whom were my former colleagues. So if you read that article carefully, they do not have a solution. They either don't like using the city charter for this purpose, or they believe that maybe it makes it more difficult to remove encampments in the city. And by the way, we hear it from both sides. Some people who think it makes it more difficult, and some people who wish we would just sweep everybody away tomorrow. That's not going to happen, nor should it happen. But they don't really have a solution. I mean, at the end of their opinion article, they said we should elect people who will do something about this. Well, that's true, we should, but it's been 6 years since the state of emergency was declared. We believe we should do something about it right now and not keep waiting for some other solution to come along.
Good, thank you. Other questions out there? Yes.
Marcia?
Yes.
My question also is kind of along what Marcia was saying about the people who decline services, of which there appear to be quite a few. What do you do about them?
So some people do decline, and we cannot force them to accept housing or accept services. Let me give the illustration of just a couple of weeks ago. The city, because of some public safety concerns and blocking the baseball fields up at Miller Park on Capitol Hill, they closed that encampment. And they went through a process of reaching out. I think the outreach teams visited the encampment at least 3 times, maybe more. And of the approximately 40 people who were living there, all but 3 or 4 accepted housing and accepted the services that were being offered. So if there's quality to the housing, like the new enhanced shelters or the tiny home villages or hotel motel rooms, I think people most likely are going to be accepting these services. Now, it's true that if there's a public safety problem or someone like at Miller is blocking the baseball diamond and they won't move to someplace else, then the city can remove them. That's true, but that's not the first option. The first option is let's help these folks by giving them housing and services and get them inside.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else that'd like to ask a question? Adele.
I'm concerned about the section in the 5th the waiving of land use codes and regulations. These are not explicitly stated. Could you comment?
Yes, I will, Adele. That paragraph is designed to do two things. First, it's designed to allow the city to site these facilities, some of these 2,000 units, quicker. So it's designed to expedite the siting of where these facilities are going to be. And second, it's designed to lower the costs of these facilities. So it waives building permit fees, construction permit fees, those types of things. And while the state of emergency is in effect, it refunds the city's portion of the sales tax to the entities that are providing these services. So as you know, the city of Seattle does not actually construct emergency enhanced shelters itself. They always work through nonprofit organizations. King County does the same. And so it waives their fees, it expedites the siting of these, and it refunds the city's portion of the sales tax.
That doesn't quite address the land use codes being waived.
So again, like the other measures, we don't tell the city exactly how to do it. We just give them the authority to do that. The Washington State Environmental Protection Act does allow cities to waive some zoning and environmental issues in order to address a public emergency or a public safety crisis like this. So let me think of an example of how that might work. In the city, used to be a business or something, but it's not there now, and the lot is, and the city wants to more quickly establish an enhanced shelter there. They could waive some of the normal process that they would go through so that they can site it more quickly at that location, if the state of emergency is in effect.
And that's not putting people out on the land, that there's residents on the land. That's questioned. Okay.
I'm sorry, ask that question again.
Oh, there's often articles about having people put off their land when they don't want to be.
Oh, no, we're not. You're talking about eminent domain, where the city could use their powers, their police power for eminent domain. No, not at all. We're not talking about that at all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there anyone else that wants to? Oh, we really think it's wonderful that you're doing something to try and solve this problem. And I hope that people have a better idea of what Compassion Seattle is now. And if they support it, they can get a petition off the line, off your website, and pass that around. And we certainly need things like this to solve our problem.
Well, thank you very much for your time. You know, I've been up to Horizon House many, many times. And as I get older, my wife and I have even been talking about, so where do we want to live when we don't live where we are today? So you're all a good advertisement for Horizon House. So keep it up. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you.